You've spent a lot of time studying history and writing about current events at the moment. How would you rate your predictive ability given the current state of the world? Were there things that you foresaw coming or things that you've been particularly surprised by?
Well, nobody gets to predict with 100% accuracy anything because, among other things, all the time things happen that you could never have seen coming. I could never have seen COVID coming. I just didn't. So whenever anyone sort of boasts about their predictive capabilities, I always think you have to do it with a certain amount of humility because, I mean, things happen all the time you couldn't see. You can only see round the bend of the road you're coming to. You can't see round the corner. Yeah, I mean, some things I've written about for years, particularly in my book, The Strange Death of Europe, that came out in 2017, which I think are sadly coming to fruition. I say sadly because people think that if you've predicted something and got it right, you would feel any pleasure. And that would only be if the thing you were predicting was something you looked forward to. And what I was predicting was something I was dreading. And that was the transformation of our country of birth and many other countries in the West due to demographic change. And I mean, every day now, pretty much, somebody says to me, gosh, I used to think what you were saying in The Strange Death of Europe was a bit out there, and now I realize you were right. But it gives me no pleasure for them to say that. Because I always sort of think, well, if you'd have agreed back then, some things might not have happened. But, you know, as Mark Stein said, you know, demographics is destiny. So it's one of the things you can predict with the most ease. Yeah.
Did you have Victoria's Secret's plan to bring sexy back on your 2023 bingo card?
Why are Victoria's Secret's bringing sexy back?
After experimenting with 300-pound mannequins, plus-size models, disabled models, trans models, a male model, and a 38-year-old football player, Victoria's Secret have made the controversial decision to switch strategy and start using hot women to model their underwear again.
It makes commercial sense, to my mind. Yeah, it is quite easy. I'm always amazed that advertising executives find it complex, this stuff. I mean, all you need to do is stick sexy guys on stuff and stick sexy girls on stuff, and you can sell the merchandise. It sort of pretty much writes itself. Yeah, I'm not particularly surprised that if you stick Lizzo in a bikini, it's not as appealing as a bit of sales merchandise. But, you know, live and learn, I suppose.
Live and learn.
Live and learn.
One of my friends owns a very big clothing company. And for a while, they tried plus-sized models.
Yeah.
Mostly for women. There's not much of a body positivity movement for men.
No, it's not like a beer gut movement.
The skinny fat revolution. Yeah. And he said, we've split tested this into oblivion. Big girls don't sell clothes.
Right.
So when you see that, when you see a company, you know, Ann Summers are making double plus-size dildos or whatever, the company is actively hurting their top line and bottom line to be able to send the right message.
Right.
And that's all well and good up until some shareholder meeting where some 70s-year-old guy looks at the far right column of an Excel sheet and goes, what the fuck's this?
Yes.
And they go, no, you don't understand. It's this really cool new movement. It's very progressive. And he goes, I don't care.
Right.
I want more money than we had last year, and this is less money than we had last year.
Yeah. Yeah, they, well, I mean, I suppose it all starts off from a good place, like some or many things. But look, if you might agree that, you know, it's not a good thing to sell anorexic-looking models to young women. That's, yeah, okay, let's all agree on that. But you can stop somewhere before morbidly obese. You know, that's where the whole thing goes wrong with the body positivity thing. Plus, there's a place where body positivity shouldn't occur. It should be, I mean, if somebody is so morbidly obese that they're at significant risk of heart failure, you shouldn't celebrate them. You should say, hang on a minute, steady on the donuts. But they don't say that. They just do. They run all the way. I wish that you could just have sort of healthy-looking women on the ads and just draw the line there. But as ever, they sort of don't know where the line is until, as you say, something wrenches them back. And I think wrenches them back is normally, as you say, the bottom line.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this sort of performative empathy point for a while. got this idea. I need to meme it better, but I think something like short-term empathy or the shallow pond of empathy. I've been thinking about what is most popular in culture at the moment is something that optimizes for its immediacy to signal that you are a good guy or good girl.
Right.
Even if that's at the expense of the ultimate outcome for the person. So let's say you're able to do something, giving the child ice cream. It may be what it wants right now. It may be bad for it long term. But if you're the ice cream promoter for the young children, you will be seen as a good person. And if you're the person who's saying, hang on a second, that's not what you want long term. Maybe responsibility in Peterson language, maybe not casual sex in Louise Perry language, maybe, not as much food as you want in body positivity language. You're seen as bigoted or judgmental or whatever.
That's because there's no countervailing force in the culture. The unlimited empathy, people have run a long way very fast because, as you say, there's a short-term gain to be seen to be being empathetic. Let's celebrate yourself. But ordinarily, you would have some other counterforce in the society, and different forces have provided that in history, including the church. But if there is no counterforce to say, for instance, long-term gratification better than short-term, or whatever, then that's a sort of unappealing position in our society now. There's plenty of room for people to be in that space, but you're still on the defensive. We still live in a society where effectively to own an ice cream truck, in the sort of language of a child, would seem to be a great thing. Just let's have the short-term thing. Not many people want that role. It's sort of uncool in some way. It might become cool at some point in the future when more people realize that the short-term gratification thing was leading to diabetes or whatever. But
it's the same as one of the justifications, I think, for why people aren't having children, that upfront children, you just see a very, very large cost on all of the joy and stuff.
Well, the Economist put it as the child tax, the amount of money you have less if you have a child. Very weird way round to look at the future of the species, isn't it? If only I died with more money in my bank account. Life of regret.
Death of regret, perhaps. Yeah. Well, it's kind of the as well the Mexican fisherman story. Are you familiar with that? The parable of the Mexican fisherman?
No, I don't think I am.
This is cool. You'll like this. So, an American businessman goes on holiday to Mexico, and while he's there,
is it a true story?
It's a parable.
Okay, right. Okay, got it.
Fucking hell. He goes on holiday. He gets taken out fishing by a local Mexican. And he asks the Mexican how he spends his time. The Mexican says, I fish a little on the morning, I catch enough for my family, we go back, we cook, we laugh around the fire, and I spend time with my children. And the American businessman goes, that's stupid. Here's a better idea. What you should do is actually spend most of your day fishing, and then with the surplus fish, you could sell them at the market. And the Mexican fisherman says, and why would I do that? So, well, once you've got the additional money, you could start to employ some of your friends, and they could come out fishing with you too, and you could catch more fish, which you could sell at the market for more money. He says, why would I do that? He says, well, once you've done that, you would be able to incorporate in America, and you would maybe be able to start a canning factory so that you could own the entire production process, and you could then sell the company for a lot of money. He said, and why would I do that? He said, because once you've done that, you'd be able to fish a little on a morning and then go back and spend time with your children around the fire.
Very good.
And I often think about that as a much more direct route to happiness,
Yeah. Well, that's the classic thing that the place you end up is the place you started from. But yes, there are lots of reasons why people aren't having children. And a lot of them are simple economic things. I mean, all of the Western countries that have terrible replacement birth rate figures are because of very easy things to solve, like cost of housing and things like that. It's not hard to build affordable housing. We just proved to be incapable of doing so. So young people wanting to both get on the property ladder and start a family think they have to do either or, and they're not entirely wrong. But that's something that governments could have sorted out, and none of them do. They're so hopeless at it, and they have been for years under consecutive governments. They never build enough housing, so young people don't see a future, don't feel hopeless, and then don't have kids, and then everyone wonders why there's a demographic crisis.
intergenerational competition theory is something I learned about a couple of weeks ago. You familiar with this?
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know about it before, but it makes complete sense. There was always this talk of millennials are the first generation to have done worse than their parents. And it seems if you
they're not the first in a little while.
Yes.
First in 2 generations.
Yeah.
Yeah. A bit long.
And it seems like millennials actually probably just about managed to get over on average.
Okay.
But Gen Z materially...
Yeah.
Difficulty in getting on the property ladder. The most common living arrangement for men under 35 is still at home with their parents.
Awful.
It bakes in this sort of intergenerational competitiveness and a dissatisfaction when you look at where your parents were, and this felt sense that your parents got advantages that you never did.
Which is usually not true. I mean, they didn't suffer inflation at the same rates, but they suffered very high taxation in the post-war period. We haven't had taxation at the levels it was at in the 1960s and 70s, for instance, in the UK. There was a time when people were top-rate taxpayers were paying 99% tax. A friend who once in that period paid over 100% tax one year for reasons he could.
How's that possible?
It'll be back tax and that sort of thing. So, I mean, there's a tendency, particularly among millennials and after, to think that their parents had it very easy. And my experience of people from that generation, the boomer generation, it didn't feel easy at the time. And there were certain things. Getting on the property housing ladder was a little bit easier than it is, or significantly easier, once you have 5 times average earnings, being the inadequate to get to the average property price. You see a split go on. But you always have to factor. I mean, it's like if you say, the millennials, the first ones, or Gen Z were the first ones, and whoever, to have a better standard of living, you have to bake in things like, they had a world war, So that's quite a big PS. Well, there's a big footnote. Everyone has their challenges. I just don't see why once you've identified them and know the way out of them, you don't do them. But
I was talking to mutual friend Eric Weinstein about this. I also spoke to Sam about this. I've spoken to a bunch of people. Why, in your opinion, do you think everybody struggles to agree on the truth now?
Oh, well, that's quite straightforward. We can't agree on what's happened. So, broadly speaking, an event happens now, and some people believe it has happened, and other people think it hasn't. We've been through a number of deranging years since we first spoke, in which, for instance, as I say, there's been a global pandemic, which some people believe was something which killed millions and millions of people in their own country and think they were just about saved from dying themselves. And other people think it was a fake. And other people think we just massively overreacted. And other people think it was all planned. And nobody agrees what happened. That's just to take one example. In America, you have obviously the fact that nobody agrees who won an election. That's a problem. And so you just have basic things nobody can agree on that just happened. I always say in America, it'd be nice if we could just agree that one thing that's just happened. But then nobody wants to. And says you must be a WEF shill if you believe that. So I think it is the problem. And then obviously underneath that is just the problem, the fact that the treadmill of social media has totally changed the way in which we communicate, the way in which we learn things, absorb things, and we don't know what the consequences of that are. We're so early into it. And it seems to me that, among other things, it's allowed people to have their own version of recent events, recent history, the past few days. And so when you sit down to talk to somebody, you can fairly swiftly work out whether they're somebody who's open to the idea of things that happened having happened, or whether or not they will fight you all the way. And that just makes everything much harder than it used to be. And that isn't to sort of particularly pine for the era of a mono-narrative, if that era ever particularly existed. And when you read history, not clear that it did. But it's just massively worse. And news is coming at us at such a pace these days that it's just like, every day feels like, a month's worth of news in the past. Things just fly by you so fast that you don't even have time to absorb it before it's happened. So I think that's part of the reason. And in any case, the whole concept of truth as being a desirable thing in the society seems to have eroded from both the right and the left. And
how so?
Well, Truth, for instance, used to be the basis for university education and the basis of university inquiry, that you sought the truth wherever it led you. That was the point of academia, for instance. Politics was different. Politics was always about having to find a way around truth and deal with it and address
Pesky
it.
Inconvenience.
Yeah, address it where you could, but get around it if it was too awkward. But inquiry used to be about seeking truth. And they've been like that for a couple of thousand years or more, since the Greeks certainly. And then it changed at some point relatively recently. And truth is now not a desirable thing because truth hurts people. And it can be mean.
So it's not only that people have different opinions on things.
They don't agree that the thing we used to agree on is worth.
They have different
going
facts
for.
as well.
Well, they have different facts, but they don't agree that they don't agree that you should just follow truth wherever it takes you. Because other things are prioritized over truth. I still prioritize truth over all things if I can, and try to. And I think that's the interesting thing about the world, is finding out what in it is true and what is not. But other people don't seem to have that same appetite anymore, and would rather live in lies, which I think is very dangerous for an individual and very dangerous for society. In fact, it's dangerous for an individual and lethal in a society, I'd say. Yeah.
It's interesting to think about the motivations that people have for not believing something which is already on an unshaky foundation of we can't agree on the thing that we're not believing about. And Gwynder, one of my friends, has this idea that if no amount of evidence would dissuade someone of what they believe, then they don't have a rational belief. They have a religious ideology.
Yeah. That's Jonathan Swift beautifully put it, as you can't reason somebody out of a position they weren't reasoned into. Yeah, of course. You're dealing with dogma with many people today. It's just they don't know which faith they belong to. But it's dogma for sure. I just am not very interested in their views because I think they can't defend them. And if you can't defend your views, I'm not very interested in them because I don't find them persuasive.
I asked Sam this about whether or not, obviously, 10, 15 years ago, he was a big part of the new atheist movement. And I guess you were tangentially on the...
I was a little bit of a whippersnapper.
Ancillary.
I was a whippersnapper new atheist.
You were an orbiter. It's referred to.
I was a short trousers new atheist.
Okay. But, your book, The Madness of Crowds, talks about the collapse of grand narratives. One of the biggest collapses of grand narratives was religion. So I asked Sam whether or not, looking back, he believed that his deconstruction of religion was on balance a net good or a net negative.
What did he say?
He managed to evade being too committal either way, I think. But what do you think? What's your opinion?
Well, I think
there?
it's like a lot of things that you deconstruct. You only know afterwards whether or not it's something you could have put back together. It's like children with bicycles. They're very fine at taking them apart, very bad at putting them back together. Not comparing Sam to a child, but I think it is something you notice only once you've taken it apart. Once you can't reconstruct it, you'd realize what function it might have performed. I said to Sam on stage a few years ago that I thought that it would all be fine if most atheists were as rational and level-headed as Sam, but it's not Sam Harris all the way down. It's like Sam Harris followed by total mentalists and who just will not reason or rationalize anything and are just screaming harpies of insanity.
Yeah.
So that's a shame. But yes, I think that whole thing works for some people, but obviously doesn't work for others. Religion is, Schopenhauer, among others, saw it, was religion was philosophy for the masses. Absent religion completely, lots of options of what will happen. One is that the general public lose the overarching framework of their lives, and have nothing to replace it with. And another one is that they do replace it with other things, which are new religions which crop up all the time. We have the religion of the body negativity movement. We have the religion of trans. We have the religion of gender. We have the religion of race, and all these things have just stepped into this void. And they're all dogmatic things with their founding texts. They've all got their own catechisms of a kind.
Priests.
They have priests. They have excommunication rights. And my only observation really would be on that is that I preferred the old gods. I preferred the old priesthood, funnily enough, partly because we knew its flaws. And the sweet point where you see the flaws of religious belief but can still live through it is one even I can especially feel nostalgic for, because I don't like the new priesthood. I find them as corrupt as any priesthood in history, with the negative attribute that not everyone's woken up to them yet. I mean, do we have in our culture an equivalent, for instance, of the meme of the paedophile priest? I don't think we do. I mean, for instance, I would love it if the sort of adults who push, gender dysmorphia stuff on children were regarded as the equivalent of paedophile priests. I think that'd be fine. But my point is, it doesn't come with that yet. It's like the Catholic Church in Boston circa 1950. The priests are still fiddling with the kids, but no one wants to talk about it. So,
in other news, this episode is brought to you by Maui Nui Venison. Maui Nui Venison brings the healthiest red meat on the planet direct to your door. Not only is it the most nutrient-dense meat on the planet, they're the only 100% stress-free, wild-harvested venison that you can get. Here's my super secret hack. If you are sick of buying meat that always goes off, put it in the freezer, from frozen, salt both sides of it, put it in an air fryer for 10 to 12 minutes each side, and you have a perfectly cooked steak from frozen that will never go off because it's going from freezer to mouth in the space of 25 minutes. It's a complete game changer. All of their cuts are spectacular, and you can get them frozen, delivered to your door. But their venison sticks are my favorite while I've been on the road. You can get the healthiest red meat on the planet delivered directly to your door and get 20% off by going to the link in the description below or heading to mauinuivenison.com/modernwisdom and using the code modernwisdom at checkout. That's MAUINUI venison.com/modernwisdom and modernwisdom at checkout. It makes me think, as we were talking earlier on, about some of the ways in which lots of decisions need to be made and you don't know how the outcomes are going to occur, that there are no solutions, only trade-offs, quote. I keep coming back to that in my personal life as well, but thinking about what people want to optimize for in their existence, there are no solutions ultimately. And you have to give up certain things.
You don't have to give up everything.
Well, no, there's certainly better solutions, right? But the world is trying to maximize everything. And it goes back to the shallow pond of empathy, that accepting that trade-offs are an inevitability doesn't fit into that paradigm, right? Okay. We will always optimize for what feels most pleasurable or empathetic in the short term.
I don't know. I don't feel that.
Well, that's how it plays out, I think.
For a lot of people.
Yes.
If they have no character.
Indeed.
Well, what do you optimize for?
I try to optimize for peace. That seems to be the thing that, for me, in my personal life, I try to do. If the price is my sanity, the cost is too high, no matter what it is. And I continually throw that rule out of the window all the time. That's what I try and aim for, right? My own rubric is...
I love that, the peace in your private life.
I try.
It reminds me of Lady Bracknell's line about the general at the end of The Importance of Being Earnest. She says, the general was essentially a man of peace, except in his domestic life. You're the other way around.
Yeah,
you're a man of peace in your domestic life,
except for my
maybe you are
life.
generally as well.
No, I don't think I am.
You're a highly agreeable person.
I'm fucking not.
Really?
I try as best I can to keep a lid on it. But yeah, the this lack of meaning and people's desire, their absolutely fervent desire to try and fill that hole with as many things as they can.
Like Lizzo.
Like Lizzo, indeed. Did you see the stories that came out about Lizzo?
Oh, it was wonderful.
About her
Yeah,
Amsterdam.
my favorite story of the year.
Yeah.
Well, a long way.
What for the people that don't know, Lizzo was on tour in Amsterdam, took her backup dancers to the red light district, and made the backup dancers, some of the backup dancers, eat bananas out of the vaginas of Amsterdamian strippers.
My view was that what had happened here was that Lizzo thought you could outsource the eating of your 5 fruit and veg a day.
To the vagina, to the vagina of the stripper, or to the
she's so
mouth
reluctant
of
to eat healthily, she even outsources the 5 fruit and veg a day. That's my view.
Well, it seems to me that it seems to me that both Lizzo, Ellen DeGeneres, Jimmy Kimmel, all of these people who up front.
Oh, isn't it wonderful? It's so great. It's
the
always the
Schadenfreude
nicest.
is
It's always the
palpable.
nicest squeak. Not that Lizzo ever looked nice, but like the squeaky clean Ellen DeGeneres thing. You know, just dance and And of course, they're horrible in real life.
People behind the scenes.
Of course, it's a sort of rule that, by the way, actually, with public figures, is that the ones who are most, sort of sweetie in public tend to be the nastiest in private. And sometimes the opposite can be true. Some people who are thought to have a very hard edge in public can actually be lovely, lovely people in private. Like Margaret Thatcher was a good example. Very, very nice to people around her, but could make tough decisions.
Yeah, to me, it's a counter signal. If I see someone doing the Lizzo thing of I am so body positivity, it becomes their identity of how they're a flaming sword card carrying paragon of whatever this thing is.
Well, it's also a bit like the Jimmy Savile, the hospital. What was it called? It still goes, but there was a hospital for children that he raised money for all the time. And whenever anyone would try to do an investigation, Savile would go, "Oh, it's gonna hurt the hospital for kids. You sure you want to run that story? Oh, that's going to hurt the hospital." So there are lots of people in our own age who have a thing like that. They build like the equivalent of the Jimmy Savile Children's Hospital facade up in order to protect themselves.
Right? Are you saying that Lizzo's work with the body positivity movement is in a case to try and effectively put a wall?
Yes,
of
it creates
large
a wall.
Bodied people in front of her.
Very difficult wall to get over.
Well, I think it's probably easy to get over. Getting around it might be more difficult.
Norman Dog, I got into a car and it ran out of gas.
So I had this idea about why certain women are very pro body positivity movement. And I was listening to Bill Burr do a live show, and he said, ladies, if you could only support the WNBA the way that you support a fat chick who is gaining weight and no longer a threat to you, that it would be doing more numbers than the NBA is. And I realized that some non-zero number of women may deep down in their darker moments realize that they don't discourage some of their friends from gaining weight.
Yes.
Because they can eat themselves out of their intrasexual competition for potential partners.
Oh, come on, men are like that as well.
How do we play that game?
I mean, this is going to show a low side of my character, but you can't say always that you're sad if somebody you're not very close to, but you knew, and you see them after some years and they're fat. I mean, you can't say there isn't a slight sort of, you'll never guess, he's become fat. There's different versions of that with men, I think. I think men can be complicit in that as well. Yeah. The thrill when a friend balds early, I think that's very common.
Thrill. There'll be a German word for that.
Of course.
Like Schadenfreude, but specifically for the
scalp.
Yeah. Scalp and Freud.
I think lots of people do that. But it's a pretty bad thing to encourage among people. But yeah, I think it is part of the competition, taking out of the competition, for sure.
I was thinking as well about how material conditions, you were saying before, people's parents maybe had it better in some ways, but also would have had it way worse.
Yeah, of course.
Material conditions often don't impact people's demeanors in the way that they might have predicted. Like, rich people can be bitter idiots and poor people can be grateful heroes.
Although, as George Orwell said, by the age of 50, every man gets the face he deserves.
What do you mean by that?
I think that's actually true. I think there's a certain age, it might not be 50 now, but it's a certain age where you do show your life on your face. Oh, yeah. I mean, for instance, somebody who's very profoundly depressed for a long time. It writes itself across the face. It writes itself in their eyes, I think. People, particularly unhappiness, writes itself on somebody's face. Joy does as well. I mean, if somebody smiles a lot, they have laugh lines.
Yeah.
And yes, there's a great truth in it. I mean, we know that because we judge people by their faces, by the way they interact with us, by the way they look at us. It's perfectly sensible.
I've found a quote the other day that said, people with low self-esteem will always find a way to be miserable. And it made me think that material conditions a lot of the time are what young people, but many people lay at the feet of their despondency or their nihilism or their critical nature or whatever it might be. And I've seen enough of my friends vacillate through varying levels of affluence or relationship or singletonness or whatever. And one of the things, sometimes it impacts the way that they show up, but many times they are the common denominator between all of those situations. And the material conditions don't actually impact the way that they show up all that much.
That's true. Well, there's a problem of analyzing this, which is that anyone who's successful inevitably looks at their own path to success as being, to some extent, preordained. I mean, almost everyone. I mean, if you just get, there are some people with wild luck, but most people, or a lot of people, let me say, who are successful, look back and they think, well, I don't understand this person who hasn't made it to the same rung of the ladder as I have. Why didn't they work hard? And so there's a sort of callousness, actually, that can creep in there. But equally, people are, to a great extent, masters of their own fate, and it's a very hard one to analyze that, as I say, because the outriders skew the whole statistics. I mean, the outrider who does very well, not everyone can do what he or she has done, but he or she is likely to think they could have done.
Well, you retroactively, lots of people that achieve success look back at the route that was particularly designed by them, for them, to achieve the very specific type of success that they managed to get, and then retrofit that as a universal law that anybody else could follow. Yeah. One of the things I've realized as I've spent more time digging into personal growth and self-development and all of that stuff, so much of it is post hoc rationalization about one person's very idiosyncratic solution for this thing. And they say, these are the universal principles of X, Y, and Z. And you go, no, they're not.
No, they're highly personal.
It's your personality just spun up and tuned up to 11.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, most very successful people I've ever met have some story of their own growth, which is both inspiring and not replicable, because they're unusual people.
Well, what's the alternative? As you said before, like you have to lay the agency at your own feet, because if you were to perhaps admit the truth, which is I was in the right place at the right time, that can be the case. Not many people say that, but yes, some do. Yeah. If you're in Britain in the 80s, for instance, it's a good time to make money. Easier, better than today. So some people will say, it was a great place at the right time. But most people do sort of vaguely think if they've made it that it was sort of preordained. I mean, I all do that to some extent. I often describe myself as being lucky and then need somebody to remind me of how hard I've worked. I had a friend who joined Goldman Sachs in 1998, and he said he had an absolute golden period for about
10 years.
Yeah, a little bit less. He said it was already starting to wind down
before Lehman Brothers.
Yeah, some of that was to do with DEI, a very early instantiation of DEI.
That's right. Yes, there's several books that make that clear in
the
subtext.
Right?
Yeah, several books that make it clear about some of the hiring processes going on.
Yeah, like 2006, he was already seeing it. But he told me he made a trade on 9/11. He made a very particular trade and bypassed all of the security concern, or the limits on everything, and the pit boss or whatever. He's just some young dude. He's been there for 2 years, right, out of whatever university or something.
And what did his boss think of the trade?
Came over and said, like, what the fuck are you doing? And he said, look at this. If this, then that. If this, then that. Ran it all the way down. He said, this is the outcome. This is what's going to happen. And he was like, I don't know what. So first off, he was concerned that it was going to go wrong. And then he made the most ungodly amount of money in the space of 3 hours. And then all the markets shut for 10 days from September 12th.
Yeah.
And the only organization that had spare capital was Goldman because of this particular trade.
Wow.
And he was basically told, we may need to cut this, I'll check with him. He was basically told, go home, don't tell anybody
Yeah, of course.
that you made this.
He shorted the market. Yeah, I mean, it was widely thought after 9/11 that because the stock market tanked, of course, immediately, and we didn't know if there was going to be a world war, if this was a world war, it was regarded very swiftly as actually being the duty of Wall Street to not do that.
But Bush came back. You remember he did that ground zero announcement.
Yeah,
we will do that. And that was as much for the stock market as it was for the fucking popular.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yes, because I mean, if the stock market collapses, I mean, many more Americans, I can't remember the percentage, but are invested in the stock market than in Britain. I mean, like 3 times more or something.
Right.
Americans
with 401ks.
Yeah, more than 50% of the population in America has some investment in the stock market. So it's different from in the UK, where when the pound was shorted in the 1990s by Soros and others, a lot of British people are not that sympathetic because they don't see themselves as being involved in the stock market, which of course they are. They just don't know it.
You mentioned George Orwell there. The Telegraph recently spoke about his wife's biography or autobiography.
Oh, there's a new biography of Sonia Orwell, yeah.
George Orwell was sadistic, misogynistic, homophobic, and sometimes violent. Biographer of the legendary writer's wife says darkness that runs through 1984 is a reflection of his soul. Should we unperson George?
Well, it would be the obvious end point to the
full circle.
Full circle. Yeah, this is just a way for the author to get publicity, is to repeat things everyone knew. I mean, George Orwell held the views of his time about gay men, for instance. We know he was a little bit homophobic, but it was the 1940s, you know. Nancy boys and so on, as he would have called them, were not, you know, people weren't.
That sounds like a 1990s taxi driver's insult that they've thrown out.
It was a sort of word that Orwell and people of his generation would use, you know, fairies, that sort of thing. And he does in some of his letters and some of his articles. But I mean, so fucking what? I don't care. I mean, was he sadistic? Probably. In some ways, sometimes. Could he be cruel and nasty? Probably, being a human being. I just think that the absurdity of our age of judging people in the past, well, you know, just wait till people do that to you.
Yeah.
You know, wait till somebody weighs up your own life in the balance and finds you wanting. You know, I mean, I think it's preposterous. Human beings are what we are. Being amazed at us in the past is always just an expression of our own vanity and thinking we've got past all that. It's like the way, if a friend of mine was saying to me the other day when I was at Oxford, if you want to get a grant to study these days, say in English, and you were to choose Shakespeare as your subject of study, which is sort of unusual these days, you would, for instance, have to find Shakespeare guilty of, you know, racism, colonialist thinking, and so on. And it doesn't seem to strike these people that actually their job is not to judge Shakespeare. Shakespeare judges us. And he might find us wanting.
How so?
Well, he gives us visions of the universe and our place in it, which it would do us well to listen to. And that might include exposing human follies, human weakness, human pride, human sin, human lust, the tendency to do evil in the name of doing good, or think you're doing good and do great harm. So much more. All of this is in Shakespeare's work, in his characters, in the things he created in his mind and his work. I think that if you look at a panoply of a vision like that, you should think, I wonder what he's telling us, rather than I wonder how I can judge him. What's the point of the latter? It's so boring. Human being from the past in human being in the past, shocker. Well.
Has it always been this way? Has it always been people of the present judging people of yesterday by the standards of today?
Well, most people didn't have time in the past to engage in that. Too busy trying to put food on the table, or surviving past the age of 25, you know. But what it is in our current society is there's a very strange lack of respect for wisdom. Henry Kissinger said this in the early years of the internet. He said, all the knowledge is there, but where's the wisdom? People might not like me quoting Dr. Kissinger in that regard, but again, he knows a lot more than most of his critics. I do think that's a oddity of the age. I think the oddity, the vanity of trying to judge everyone from the past by our current standards is just absurd. And you think you know more than Shakespeare? You think you know more than Orwell? These are minnows snapping at giants. I don't care for them.
One potentially unfortunate situation is that women's mental health is in part down to misogynistic songs. When BTS lead singer Jungkook changed to a more misogynistic music, a disturbing trend followed. A psychiatrist's point of view on BTS's Jungkook and the messages of pop music. Early in their teen career, BTS took a deliberate stance to refrain from objectifying or sexualizing women. Despite going against a music industry norm, they achieved huge success. Now, as part of his solo launch, different imagery has surfaced in Jungkook's songs. They include a woman telling her man that she will be your fantasy and swallow your pride to make him never think about cheating. Lyrics that identify...
Why you said swallow your pride in a particularly suggestive way?
I did not at all. I've got worse. I've got more to go here.
Okay.
Lyrics that identify women as those hoes over there, and a male rapper telling his female partner, I wanked before you came so that I can fuck you longer. Of course, in reality, Jungkook's songs are par for the course, or even tame.
Does that work, by the way, what you just described?
You've never increased your stamina by having a warm-up?
I'd have thought the lyric more likely, I did that before you came, and now I just like to go to bed. I'd kind of like a lie down.
I did that before you came, and that's why I texted saying I'm not so fussed about you.
I don't mind. I'll have a quick dinner and then I'll go to bed.
One of my friends had a rubric for this that was masturbate before you evaluate.
Oh, well, that's true. Yeah, that can be sensible advice.
I'm not sure if I liked you or I was just horny. Yeah. But no, girls' mental health.
You were reading out these charming lyrics.
That's it. No, those hoes over there, I wanked before you came so that I can fuck you longer.
Well, where to start?
Downstream from K-pop is a litany of female mental health problems. That's what I'm saying.
There's a problem here, isn't there? Because on the one hand, popular culture does have a massive impact on the way we see the world. I was at a gym recently where I actually asked the gym staff to turn off the music because it was a load of rap, very unpleasant rap, with a repeated use of the N-word in it. Obviously, it was a black rapper, or so I was assuming.
Right. You didn't find yourself mouthing along to the lyrics and were worried about it.
No, I didn't. But actually, I don't. That's right. What problem could possibly emerge from singing along?
Mate, just to interject there, someone got cancelled on TikTok for mouthing the N-word along to a song.
Right.
So it's no longer.
It's possible.
It's no longer the sound of the word; it's the mouth shape that word engenders.
Well, we know that it's a magical word in our time, which even the speaking of suddenly summons up the demons of the past.
Lord Voldemort.
Yeah, very, very strange. Yeah. But no, I said to the gym staff, I just don't want to hear it because I just don't want it in the background of my life.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Was it that gym that we trained at?
We can discuss this another time. But anyway. No, I just don't like it. There are certain things I don't want in my ears, and that's one, actually. I have no interest in hearing the word because it's a banned word, so why would I want it in my mental background?
Yeah.
But anyway, the point is of course popular culture has a huge impact on people. It has a huge impact on the way in which people see themselves. It does. At the same time, you can overstate it. You know, somebody is not generally unhappy just because of the popular culture, apart from anything else, because you can easily step out of it, as I try to do. And, you know, be a part of your time, but not be its creature, as Schiller says. And so, no, I think it's a sort of weak excuse for unhappiness that the popular culture happens not to be to your taste, or avoid it, get out, look up from the screen.
When is cancel culture going to come for rap lyrics? Because it seems to me that, you know, as we're fighting against the misogyny of air conditioning temperatures in offices that are conditioned to the male body temperature as opposed to the female body temperature, or
I mean, the levity of the era is just astonishing to me. Lots of people attribute to me this quote that is not quite right. I don't think it's quite from me, but that we'll be talking about gender pronouns when the barbarians break in. But I've said something like it quite a few times. But I mean, gender norms and air conditioning. It's the sort of thing that you would be discussing just before you all get, macheted. I'm totally serious about this. Sometimes it's like, one of the things that actually genuinely shocked me in recent weeks, particularly after the Hamas massacre in Israel, was, and something which I do think at some point when it's all died down a bit, there might be a moment of I've got to say this carefully, but a moment of seriousness, which is, take the music festival within a few miles of the Gaza border that Hamas attacked. All the young people there were at this sort of peace rave. And this isn't in any way to victim blame. But these were people just wanting to dance and dance into the early morning. And I think it was called the peace rave, the peace and love rave, something like that. And then this hideous other world broke into them, into their lives, and ended the lives of hundreds of them. There's something haunting about this, I find, because it's especially haunting because it sort of demonstrates that your slogans and your attitudes only go so far, and they can't keep out some of the things that are lurking at the edges. And I think that when I hear people whining about minor things, if you have any idea of the world out there, if you had any idea of the things that was lurking, you couldn't possibly be complaining about this.
How do you think Gays for Gaza will get on long term?
Well, the joke at the moment is that there aren't enough tall buildings in Gaza to throw Gays for Gaza off. But these people are, I've said very often, they're part of the same phenomenon as turkeys for Christmas and chickens for KFC. I mean, I'm fed up with these fringe idiot cases. I mean, they're so mentally defective, these people, and incredibly narcissistic. I can be queer and also celebrate Palestine. No, you fucking can't. Fuck off. Just, I can both argue for a two-state solution and also celebrate queerness and also not let myself down. No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't do all those things. At some point, you've got to choose.
I've got a video to show you. I'll show you this video.
Can someone please explain to me what this means? What does reproductive justice mean? Free Palestine. What does that even mean? Like, what does it mean? I'm not pretty sure. Abortions are illegal in Palestine, unless it's like, a super medical emergency and the mother will die. From what I understand, actually a lot of Palestinians have to go to Israel to get the abortions they want. So what does this mean?
Yeah.
What? It's such a huge sign. There's 5 people holding this thing. It's massive.
That's very good.
That's Danny, the other half of Ryan, who wasn't there the day that you came.
Yeah, boys cast. Yeah,
reproductive justice means free Palestine. What do you think?
This is just incredibly ignorant young people in America who have been taught this weird version of the world where all oppressions interlink and interlock, and you're either the majority or the minority for minority rights and issues, or for majority rights and issues, and all minority rights and issues intersect and overlap, so that if you're queer, somehow no, it's not even that. These ignoramuses who couldn't point to the River Jordan if you showed it to them on a map, walk along the streets of America shouting, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Because they think the Palestinians are the underdogs in this weird version where they've mapped they've mapped a very specific version of American racial politics onto everything else in the world. It's the same thing people who talk about colonizers. I mean, there's this language of colonizers, apartheid, all this stuff. And they've just tried to map it everywhere. Well, I say everywhere. Actually, it's highly selectively. highly selectively. I mean, the people who are talking about Israelis being colonizers, when I saw that the other day on the streets of London, I thought, yes, if only there was a name for large numbers of people who came from outside to a country. And if only we could identify what they might be called in Britain. Oh, it would be immigrants, wouldn't it? Do you want to call immigrants colonizers in Britain? You sure you want to follow this logical conclusion? The talk about indigenous peoples. Oh, okay, great. Anyway, you don't want to apply that. Might there be a country or a continent, say, oh, Europe, where you don't want to start talking about the indigenous peoples? I notice that people don't. But if you do want to, welcome to hell. So, no, all that is happening is a very selective mapping of a particular interpretation of the world that very dumb people in America have tried to put on certain selective other cases. And it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But may they never find out how much it doesn't work. May they never find out. I wish them bliss in their ignorance, because if their ignorance ever gets popped, it will be as brutal a day as can be imagined.
I've been thinking for a good while about how hypocrisy is a purpose-built tool for the internet to use. It's like catnip for the internet. It's the thing, because the reason it's so purpose-built, it's like one of those can you spot the difference competitions on a touchscreen iPad. This is what's on the left, this is what's on the right. And what you have is, here's something that someone once said or a position that they used to hold, and here is what they hold now, or here is what they do in their real life, or here is whatever. Yeah. And it's kind of what you're identifying here, that you have a worldview which is self-contradictory. You're just using different words for one thing that is almost exactly the same for another thing. Right. And then complaining about this one, saying don't look over here at this one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, everyone is inconsistent to some extent, and I don't think, by the way, that I mean, on hypocrisy, or for instance, I can see a scenario where somebody might say, "Oh, Douglas, you're hypocritical on this particular question." I might say, "Well, there are some things I think are even more important than not being a hypocrite, such as, I don't know, surviving." The worst thing about him is hypocrisy, and there's a weird. Hypocrisy is the easiest one to catch people on, is the truth of that.
Correct. Yes.
It's the easiest one to spot.
Yes.
You just, and they do it, as you say, on this is what this person said 20 years ago, this is what they say now. Okay. Again, human being in growing up, shocker.
Yes.
Yeah. People are allowed to evolve, they change their minds, they grow up. It'd be rather boring to say the same thing and think the same thing only for 70 years. But yeah, people find hypocrisy very, very easy to see, and it's about the only vice you can really catch somebody on, I think, which is if you say one thing publicly and do another thing privately. It's about the only one that people are really confident on. Or most other moral judgments, for better or worse, have sort of ebbed away, but people still are able to judge hypocrisy. But I think, I think there are worse things. I think not standing up for your loved ones, not standing up for your country, not standing up for yourselves in the face of horrible opposition from within and without are probably worse than hypocrisy.
I heard you say recently, you don't have to agree with everyone's principle to respect the principle they're sticking to.
Did I say that? Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, it's nice.
Okay. I didn't know I said that, but yeah.
You did.
Okay.
But the reason that I like that is I think it shows why the bravery conversation or standing up for something that you believe in is something that is at least then, if someone is prepared to stand up for whatever their beliefs are, that you can assume they're telling the truth, especially if they pay a high price for it. It's one of the reasons why I have a good amount of faith that Sam believes the things that he says. Yeah.
Well, why would he not?
He pays an unbelievably high price to continue to flip-flop from one tribe to another tribe to another tribe.
I don't think it's an unbelievably high price, but a price, let's say.
Relatively high price, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, very early in some people's careers, or when people first make it to public notice, people say things like, do you really believe what you say? The answer to which for most people is, or ought to be, well, why would I say it if I didn't believe it? There are people who obviously do say stuff for lols or clicks or monetary purpose, but at a certain point, I mean, you got to accept that the person thinks what they think, and respect them for it, or at least do them the decency of believing that they mean it. And I think that even on people I disagree with wildly. I mean, it's such a boring argument, that one. Some people use it, particularly on the left. It's like, I wonder if they actually even believe it. I think they don't. I think they're just doing it for money. Okay, well, that's an easier way to try to ignore them than actually trying to contend with the possibility that what they're saying is something they mean and believe, and trying to work out if there's anything in it. Much easier to say the person's only doing it because they're paid or something.
Yeah, that's the shill grifter accusation.
Very boring accusation.
Yeah.
I don't doubt there are some people who that is the case with, but
way fewer than
people think.
Michael Malice has a hierarchy of different, I think it's like the hierarchy of grifters.
Don't know why. The moment you say Michael Malice, my face immediately sort of starts to smile.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's like industry plant, paid opposition, controlled psyop.
Yes,
it goes all the way up, and he said that he descended recently. He's not quite at paid opposition, but I think he's industry plant now. I think Lex Friedman is paid opposition.
Paid is different from controlled opposition.
Maybe it's controlled opposition. I don't fucking know.
Controlled opposition is. These are such weird terms that have cropped up in our era.
I love it.
Again, I think they're sort of low resolution explanations for really, really low resolution explanations for things. Whenever I hear somebody describe things as that, I always sort of know that you're not dealing with somebody who actually understands the world.
Do you find there's definitely a trend of conspiratorial thinking, conspiracism, much stronger in our adopted homeland than it is in the UK, I think?
Yes, that's true.
What do you think? How conspiracy pilled are you? Do you see...
I mean, it's this is the moment when people say, controlled opposition.
You've ascended. This is me allowing you to graduate from...
I think I talked about this on the Boys Cast, that's right. And briefly, and various people wrote to me saying, there you go. That's proof that you're paid.
You're glowing, as it's called.
But what's that?
You heard you're glowing?
No, what's that?
So... Tell me if I'm wrong with this, Mark. You're the resident glow expert, but your glowing means you're like a planted person who's saying something that is outing their it's an intelligence operation that's breached the surface and people can see it. They comment on TikTok saying like you're glowing.
So it's like the people alleged to be FBI who are at certain protests, all wearing chinos and t-shirts,
so you're conspiratorial.
Yeah. Well, so the conspiracy. No, the thing with conspiracy theories is it's very difficult in our era because some of the conspiracies are true, of course, have come true, or known to be true. Lab leak conspiracy theory, probably true. They shouldn't have ever called. Nobody should ever have called it a conspiracy theory because it wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was one of a set of hypotheticals to explain what happened with COVID. So a lot of things get called conspiracy, which are not. They're just hypotheses that should be allowed to remain on the table, and that makes a certain type of person increasingly prone to believe that everything that's called a conspiracy theory is not a conspiracy theory. And before you know it, you get sane-ish individuals thinking that the moon landings were a conspiracy, that we didn't land on the moon, the American didn't land on the moon. I don't know whether the people who now claim that believe that the Russians also faked it. It's an interesting question to ask them. Do you think that the Soviets were capable of getting to the moon, but the Americans were not? The Americans set up like a blow fan and a flag on a dodgy papier-mâché set, but the Soviets did make it? Or did the Soviets and Americans both agree to pretend to have gone to the moon, but not really have gone? None of it makes sense to my mind. But there's but it's, I have noticed, and it's actually all the literature demonstrates this, that there's certain types of mental problems that people have that make them disproportionately likely to believe conspiracy theories en masse. And one of them is paranoia. The more paranoid a person is, the more likely they're to believe that sort of thing. And that's the observation in my own life. I've known a number of people who've gone into the world of conspiracy and not come out, and they are all people who have suffered paranoid episodes in their lives, so which adds up.
So fear engenders...
Yeah, and it's, as I say, it's a sort of low-resolution explanation for complex phenomena. And I think it's also that See, conspiracy theories come about and are used by people who, and this isn't an original point, many people have made it. They're made, the claims about them are made by and large by people who don't understand how unbelievably chaotic the world actually is, or can't face it. So they can't face the fact that, yeah, somebody you followed in the newspapers every day for all of your life did actually just die in a freak car crash because the driver was drunk. They can't bear the idea. The world can't be that cruel. It can't be that random. You want a bed?
It's got to be coordination. It can't be coincidence.
Exactly. So people who can't cope with the wild frivolity of the roulette table of our lives always go to there must be somebody behind it. There must be somebody who's controlling all this. You joking? Nobody's controlling this. If anyone's controlling the damn thing, I'd want to know by now. But of course they're not. So it's a very unsatisfactory place to arrive at in your life. And by the way, my own observation, it's not very good for people personally because they start to lose agency themselves.
Locus of control gets externalized.
Yeah,
I'm at the mercy of the world.
Yeah. And the real answer is the world doesn't care.
No. Doesn't even know that you exist.
It is deaf to you.
The ability for people to hold two conflicting thoughts in their mind at the same time is supposed to be the mark of sophisticated thinking. But it does show up here, which is the government is both so useless that they can't get anything right and so sophisticated that they're able to coordinate.
Oh, that's masses of versions. The Arab world is filled with that. The Muslim world is filled with that. Things like, I've noticed this repeatedly on my travels, things like 9/11 was an inside job of the Americans to allow the Jews out of the World Trade Center. And also, yay, 9/11, good for Osama bin Laden. They can do both. There was somebody I knew interviewed the father of the main 9/11 hijacker. His name's gone out of my mind. I don't care. He should be forgotten. But interviewed the father in Jordan, and he was simultaneously capable of holding in his head that his son was a great shaheed, a martyr for Islam, and that 9/11 was an inside job with the Americans. What the fuck? Like, choose. I mean, do you think your son was an agent of the FBI and also a martyr? Like, hey, people do this. The Muslim world is particularly prone to conspiratorial thinking because it's a source of flattery to itself to explain why they have created so few successful societies. And Bernard Lewis made this point many years ago that the problem in the Muslim world is that they have to find explanations, because if you're given the revelations of Muhammad and you're told it's the last revelation ever from God and that you are the people who have received this revelation and everything's going to go great for you because you've got the revelation, and then like the Jews, you have one country and it does much better than any of your countries, and you can't get the economy of most of your countries going at all, and you can't provide for most of your citizenry, and nobody's coming up the ladder, and the economy's in the dust and all this. You've got to find an explanation for it, because what? We were given the revelation and they're doing much better. So, I mean, there's massive things like that sit underneath the movements of our time, which maybe billions of people on the planet believe. And they believe them because it flatters themselves. It flatters the governments who aspire to run these countries or claim to run these countries. Yeah. Billions of people believe this shit.
I was thinking about the extremist worldview beliefs, largely in the West, but I guess everywhere. And I was wondering whether we have finally moved beyond peak woke. And a study came up recently that was kind of interesting. Researchers from Change Research polled over 1,000 registered US voters from 18 to 34. A majority of both women and men consider far-rightism and far-leftism to be red flags in a potential partner. 76% of women and 59% of men consider identifying as a MAGA Republican to be a large turnoff. 64% of men and 55% of women say they'd also swipe left on someone identifying as a communist. 55% of women.
What was it for?
64% of men, 55% of women swipe left on a communist. That's a no. 55% of men said that listening to Joe Rogan was a red flag. 41% of men said the same for a woman being into astrology.
Oh, well, I'm with that one. Because if somebody says, "What's your star sign?" Date over.
There's a really famous meme where it's on iMessage, and the text says, "Mum, what time was I born at?" And the reply from Mum says, "Stay the fuck away from that girl."
Yeah, it is. The heart sinks when it comes up as a question. Oh no, what a shame.
33% of men said for Black Lives Matter it was a red flag if they say Black Lives Matter. 14% of women. 53% of women said it was a red flag if they refused to see the Barbie movie. 31% of men. 58% of women red flag if they say there are only two genders. 34% of men. 54% of women for they identify as a conservative. 33% of men for they identify as a liberal. So next time you're vibing with someone, maybe save the podcast recommendations and daily horoscopes for the second date.
Wow.
55% of women say that listening to Joe Rogan was a red flag.
I wonder if the species has any future.
Because they can't listen to Joe Rogan.
Well, no,
or anything
just
else.
like all these people are wiping out like
very
significant numbers of potential future partners.
Mm-hmm.
How weird. And Joe turning up in that.
55%.
So that's amazing. I thought, what happened to all the good old people who used to say, I don't really have an opinion on that?
Well,
what happened to those guys?
I got pulled in a good bit recently on the internet for not commenting on the recent socio-political furor that's happening in the Middle East. And I quoted you pseudonymously and said, I'm trying to make a habit of something which is very rare on the internet, to not comment on something which I know nothing about.
It's a very good rule.
And yet, it's the rarest thing of all. Why shouldn't I? People care about my insights into health and fitness, or my learnings about social psychology. Why shouldn't my fiscal advice be important? Why shouldn't my views on immigration or...
It's much to be avoided that. And I mean, in the end, you make much less of a dick of yourself if you don't start talking about everything. I mean, somebody recently sent me an article, a relatively well-known person sent me an article recently they wanted to publish about the Middle East. And near the opening said, I don't really know much about the Middle East, but this is blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, in that case, don't speak. Don't speak and say, but here's my thing. If you don't know, just agree not to do it. That's one reason why there's a lot of television these days in the UK where you can be invited on to debate with a total ignoramus who's only there for balance, for Ofcom related balance. And I just can't do that stuff anymore. It's too demeaning, that if there's a subject about, a war that you've covered or covered many times, as in my case with the Israel-Hamas wars and Israel-Hezbollah wars, I just can't be sitting there with somebody. I hate to say this, and it's not meant in a misogynistic way, but there's a lot of women who are currently invited on things for balance, firstly because they're women, secondly because they provide usually a left-wing perspective, and that's needed if it's me that's on as well. And it's so depressing to give your informed opinion about something you've seen and reported on firsthand, and then they go to the other person and they go, well, like, I think it's. I say, why aren't I just at home? Why I could be doing anything else, and I've got to listen to somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about whisk up an opinion live on air. It's so depressing. But masses of people are like that, and it's just. Yeah. If you don't know about it, don't talk about it. It's a very good rule of thumb. Or try it out in private with friends and mates and try to learn something, read a book.
Are we morally obliged to have a take on everything?
No. Most people's opinion doesn't matter. It just doesn't. And I also think that the people who spend their time online, broadly speaking, trying to broadcast out their opinions on things should be told more often. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you think. One of my rules on any war is you should never, as a writer, try to give advice to a government. This is what the Israelis must do. This is what the Ukrainians must do. I need to listen to you. I mean, first of all, you don't live in the country. And unless you live in a country, be pretty damn sure that you should be a bit humble about telling other people about their lives, you know? And also, like, who made you the tactician du jour on everything?
Well, it was the same as COVID. Everyone became a virology or epidemiology expert.
And then they became a withdrawal from Afghanistan expert, and then they became a Ukraine expert, and now they're all Middle East experts. And I just think it should be regarded as a massive red flag that the person in question is. Normally what's happened is they've downloaded the set of opinions they believe that their tribe should have.
Correct.
And that's why the morons marching in London and other cities, with the exception of the Muslims who are just whipped up all the time by the fact that the Jews do anything. I mean, Muslims don't care about other Muslims. Arabs don't care about other Arabs. Nobody cares about the Palestinians. Nobody cares about them. Can't tell you how little they care about them. Jordanians loathe them. The Egyptians loathe them. The Lebanese loathe them. They've done nothing for the Palestinians for 70 years. And yet, whenever the Israelis do anything, the Muslims across the West come out on the streets because they hate the Jews. And, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in Yemen. Not a peep on the streets of Britain and other places, certainly not big protests. Bashar al-Assad has killed more Muslims in the last 10 years than everybody on every side killed in every war involving Israel since 1948, including the War of Independence. Nobody cares. The Muslims don't come out on the streets. They don't care. The only thing they care about is their hatred of the Jews. And it motivates them like nothing else because it hits at the core of their self-esteem. They can't bear it. And so that one is very interesting to me. But there are these fellow travelers who go along with them who have downloaded, as I say, a sort of pathetic American interpretation of colonization, decolonization, racial justice, reproductive rights, and try to map everything on. And
my friend's got a theory called Gwynda's theory of bespoke bullshit. Many don't have an opinion until they're asked for it, at which point they cobble together a viewpoint from whim and half-remembered hearsay before deciding that this 2-minute-old makeshift opinion will be their new hill to die on.
It's very good. My friend Freddie Gray at The Spectator tends to run very popular pieces each time a new big thing emerges, which is the bluffer's guide to whatever. Oh, and it's great. And it usually involves, in foreign policy, usually involves saying things like, well, they better get this done before the brutal Afghan winter kicks in. You go, who made you an expert on meteorology in Afghanistan? What? Oh, no, the Ukrainians have got to make this advance before the dreaded Ukrainian May. And they just, what? I tried
the bluffer's guide.
Yeah, it's a very useful rule. I try, for instance, never to write about any foreign policy issue if it's about a country I've not visited, preferably visited multiple times. I can't bring myself to do it. I find it too embarrassing.
It's so interesting when you talk about knowing one opinion that a person holds, and from that one opinion being able to accurately predict everything else that they believe.
Yeah.
That mono-thinking just proves that you're not a serious thinker.
Well, I just think it's fairly obvious if, for instance, you say, yeah, what's the problem with a big bearded guy winning the women's weightlifting? I go, okay, I know all of your other opinions as well. And to be fair, that probably works the other way around as well, to a great extent. The interesting thing with most people is where they're slightly out of sorts with their own political side. And
well, that's exactly the point, that if it's been a long time since you were surprised by the opinion of your favorite thinker or writer or commentator or whatever it is, that's probably a reliable signal that they're not really thinking for themselves.
Yeah.
If you're just permanently, oh, yeah, it's like an old leather pair of shoes. Here we go again. The COVID things happened and I can already predict such and such's opinion on it. You go, every single time, all of the time, every single time, you know the idiosyncrasies of this person's very, very particular worldview. Well, that's because it's not theirs.
Yeah, of course.
It's everybody else's. It's outsourced thinking.
And what's really sad about that is that it means that you're not really living your life. I mean, you're living a pastiche of a prescribed set of opinions. That's so sad. I mean, it's so sad. The wasted energies and wasted lives of people who've just downloaded a set of opinions and they're just running them. Well, that's not your life. It's just someone else's life. You're just replaying.
What was that quote you taught me about being shunted to the side of the road of your own?
It's a Philip Larkin quote from a poem of his. Yes, it's a description of a couple. And he says that something is pushing them to the side of their own lives. It's a beautiful line. Terrifying line, horrifying line. It should make everyone judge for themselves.
What does it mean to you?
Oh, well, it means that there's a life that you hoped to live, a life you saw yourself living, and you got pushed to the side of it and ended up not living that life. I think a large number of people have that. Almost all unhappy people I've met have that feeling to some extent. And then you've got a choice of poisons, one of which is to choose the poison of other people held me back. Another is to face up to the fact that you were in some way a coward or a victim of circumstance or something else. But I think one thing that young people, can be encouraged to do is to set out the sort of life they would like to live, imagine the sort of life they would like to live, and then aim for it. And working it out is sometimes difficult, sometimes not. But if you do have that image of your life as you think it should be lived, and you end up not living it, that is, particularly if you can feel yourself slowly being pushed away from it, I think that's a terrible, terrible feeling.
It's like watching your own demise occur second by second.
Yeah. Fortunately, I've never felt it, but I definitely fear it.
Where do you go to find, or to avoid cowardice, or to find resilience or bravery? Because a lot of the time, the easier path is easier, and it's the one that's got the least resistance. And
surround yourself with courageous people. Surround yourself with brave people, and that can be bravery of all sorts of different kinds. And when I turned 40, I had a dinner, which I think you weren't invited to, but it's only because you weren't in town, if I remember rightly. But I did get a lot of my favorite people in the room, at least. And it was interesting that a friend made a speech in which he said it's striking. I won't say the names of the people around the table, but some of whom will be familiar to listeners. But a friend of mine gave a very touching speech I was very moved by, in which he said how noticeable it was that Douglas has surrounded himself with courageous people. And it was from a very wide array of bits of the world and different disciplines and so on. And I was really touched by that because I hadn't particularly noticed that I'd done it. But then I realized I sort of had. That actually, yes, I must have subconsciously, but maybe now consciously, wanted to be around courageous people. Because I think that courage is something that rubs off on other people. I think it's enormously to be desired to be around courageous people. And that might be different types of courage, some of it physical, some of it mental. So that's one thing. Yeah, surround yourself with courageous people, or at least not cowards, not cretins, not the sort of people who just say the same things that everyone's meant to say and so on. There's many ways people can get out of this non-life that they are being shunted into.
One of my friends, it wasn't a friend at the time, I'd just met him for the first time, but someone that I'd been interested in for a good while. I met in Austin a while ago, and he'd had an interesting story, and he'd faced a cancellation over the last few years. And he sort of told me the story, and he said he was sat on some rooftop late at night talking about this thing, and he was regaling me with the story. He said, throughout my entire life, I thought I was a hard man. I like to do man things and surround myself with masculine people, and I was into, like guns and shooting and fitness and friends with Navy SEALs and all the rest of it. He said, my entire life I was scared that I was a coward. I was terrified that I was a coward. And he said, in my darker moments, I could always hear my better self clearing his throat in the room next door.
Beautiful.
And then this cancellation thing came along. And he said, even the people that do really hard things, hard intellectual work, hard training work, hard physical work, all the rest of it, there's a difference in the kind of difficulty that they do because it's elected, right? You've chosen to do the hard workout.
Yeah.
But when the entire world comes to bear on you in a way that feels like chaos and catastrophe whipped up into a whirlwind, and he said, that was a genuine test. and he was very grateful. He said my better self stopped his coughing and kicked the door in and came to help.
Good.
But just I could always hear my better self clearing his throat in the room next door.
Well, the thing with that is the difference between situations you find yourself in that are dangerous through choice and ones that you've been thrust into, and probably know that the consequence of being thrust into a dangerous situation is much more likely to lead to PTSD and things like that than if you choose to. I've been fortunate in my life that most of the dangerous situations I've been in have been ones I've chosen to be in. And that's very different. But yes, I'm glad he found out that he was more courageous than he feared.
But think about that. What a beautiful line. To be more courageous than you feared you were. Right? This almost this war against yourself.
Yes, that's
this fear of your own nature.
Well, it's perfectly sensible. I mean, there's a horrible example I sometimes use, but I mean, if you're ever mugged for your wallet, let alone you were mugged with somebody else, let alone if you were mugged with a girl that you were with or looking after, and you just handed it over. There's several reasons that it's worth handing over the wallet for. One of which is why do I need to risk getting shot for or stabbed for $100 and a
few phone calls to the bank?
Yeah. So that's like the reason to hand over the wallet. Oh, what I care. The reason not to hand over the wallet is, are you sure that you're not going to spend the succeeding weeks dreaming dreams of pornographic violence against your attacker and thinking of how you would torture him if you could get your hands on him, and the brutal way in which you would have revenge if you ever find him?
It might be easy to just get your head kicked in a bit.
Yes. And are you sure you can live with the version of yourself that is you handing over the wallet? I said this recently in a piece in New York Post about the people on the New York subway, where there's this awful thing you've probably seen where people, like a woman will be being abused by some maniac, fentanyl-addled, drug addict. And people will either look into their phones, including men, or they will get their phones up and record. And I mean, somebody said Douglas is trying to get people killed, and I wasn't, obviously. But what I was saying was, where are the men? Just stand up and confront the guy if he's got a woman by her hair and is parading her around the carriage. And yeah, the backlash was what do you know? These people might get killed if they step in. But I say, yeah, but also maybe we'll have a more civil society if people don't think they can go around and do this stuff without consequence. I'd like to see far more standing up like that. I think it's a pathetic position, particularly for men to be in, to sit there getting out their mobile phones. But, it's everyone's choice. I don't exactly know what I would do in some of the situations I've seen, read about on the New York subway.
Didn't that guy do a thing, and now is he in jail? Did he get jailed for it?
He's charged. He's coming up for trial. This is I think his name is Daniel Needy. I think former Marine. There was a guy on the subway who was clearly off his head on various drugs. Was very, very violent towards people in the carriage. Some point tore off his top and was like, "I'm going to kill you," or something like this. And this Marine at that point stepped in, got him into a chokehold. Was clearly not meaning to do it, but the chokehold was too hard, and he suffocated the guy, and he died at the scene. And that man, the ex-Marine, is charged with, I think, murder, if not I think manslaughter. And he could face a very significant prison sentence. There's a lot of discussion in New York as to whether or not a New York jury would actually convict him.
Where's he being convicted?
In New York.
Right.
Because you could say that the guy, because there's a racial element, like with everything in America, and because the former Marine was white and the guy off his head was black, there was an attempt, of course, to put the racial lens on it. And we'll see if a New York jury, which will be comprised half or so of women who have been on the subway and have probably had unpleasant interactions, will convict this man for stepping in and genuinely think that he meant to kill the guy, or just this was like a good Samaritan act gone wrong. But it's very salutary, that sort of stuff. There was a guy in London about 15 years ago, I remember, it very much haunted me because the fiancée, the girlfriend, did a victim impact statement that was particularly harrowing, that they were on the top of a bus in London and a guy on the bus started throwing chips like at people's heads, and her fiancé got up to say, "Look, mate, lay off," and the guy stabbed him. He died. And that's and in the wake of a story like that, a lot more people in a society will be craven on the bus because they'll have that example in their head. My fear about this case in the New York Marine case is that the Marine, by doing what he did and it going wrong and the publicity it got, will stop other people doing good Samaritan.
Well, it 100% will have done while it's pending.
Whilst it's pending.
Yeah.
So a lot rides off the verdict.
That's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. And in America with a jury, when you're on one of these cases where the society could break out in rioting, I'm not sure it will for this guy because the victim wasn't enormously upstanding as a member of the community and had
Was it video? I don't think it was videoed, or at least I didn't see videos.
Quite a lot of it was videoed, but he'd also had previous things where he had like done.
There's a whole litany, like a laundry list of times that he'd been arrested for
everything.
Violent conduct.
Yeah, exactly. So he won't be that sympathetic a character, but then there are quite a lot of unsympathetic characters who get dragged through the laundry of racial justice stuff in America and become saints. I won't name any names, but
going back to that sort of where you go when you need more resilience thing and the bravery piece, what was that C.S. Lewis quote about the times not being optimal?
Oh yeah.
What's that?
Oh, that's one of my favorite sermons ever given was by C.S. Lewis at the University Church in Oxford in October 1939. Yes, I love that. Lewis was a master of prose as well as theological writing, and he gave this beautiful, beautiful sermon in which he said, the conditions are not optimal at the moment. The search for truth and beauty that our species goes through, sort of going through such a trial. But he says the point is the conditions never were optimal. They never are. He says even those periods of history which seem to be tranquil, like the 19th century, turn out on closer inspection to be filled with crises, alarms, panics, and all the rest of it. He says if humankind had put off the search for truth and beauty until the conditions were optimal, the search would never have begun. And the main point that he makes is that there is something wonderful and unusual about human beings. He says that the ants, for instance, have chosen their own route. They've chosen the safety and the security of the hive, and presumably they have their rewards. But as he says men are different. And he gives this beautiful list. I think I can remember it. He says, they propound mathematical theorems in beleaguered cells. They quote the latest poem whilst advancing on the walls of Quebec, make jokes on scaffolds, and comb their hair at the gates of Thermopylae. This is not panache, he says. It is our nature.
Fuck, that's cool.
It's true as well, in my observation. Absolutely true.
How so?
Well, because I've seen people in beleaguered cities many times, cities under fire, cities under bombardment, cities that are being razed to the ground, and human life goes on. It's an extraordinary thing. People continue their studies if they can. People continue their family life if they can. They've realized that the conditions will never be optimal. I mean, they can be better and they can be worse, but they're never perfect. And I think that the real lesson of what Lewis is saying is, and I think it's an important lesson for young people in our time, don't put off whatever it is you're meant to do until the situation is optimal. Don't fail to pursue what it is you think you're meant to pursue in your life until you have total tranquility, for instance, that you have the house or the apartment you would like, until you have the relationship you would like, until you have don't put it off until then. Or until the world is peaceful, which will never happen. Never happen. Never has happened, never will happen. Don't put it off till then, because if you put it off till then, it means you'll put it off forever. So do whatever you're meant to be doing now. Start now if you haven't started already. And if you started already, don't go any slower, for God's sake. And this is part of the cost of our times. I've said this before, but part of the cost of our times is the enormous expense of energy on idiotic things that you can do nothing about. And I think we should say to more people, don't howl at the moon. Don't shake your fist at the skies. Get on with what you're meant to be doing. And that'll be different for everybody. But I'm very, I'm too irritable to put up with going at the slow speed that a lot of people want to make us all go at these days. So I want them out of my way.
Yeah, I think a lot about the arisal of victimhood culture.
Yeah, I've got no time for.
Yeah, it seems to me that like an existential crisis is actually a luxurious position to be in because the bottom levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs have been sorted.
Yeah.
And victimhood culture is so rampant at the moment because the human system's demand for challenge is outstripping reality's ability to deliver it to it. All of the problems, most of the problems that previously would have captured the front of our attention have been moved out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I mean, resources,
our sensitivity to challenge has now been tuned up.
Yeah, hunger and so on. Yeah. I think that's true. By the way, I'm just amazed by that. I mean, I feel sometimes, or increasingly, like I'm just from a different world than the one we're now in. Certainly a different society. I'm sure it was the same with you when you were growing up, but the Britain I grew up in was a place which liked resilience. I mean, we admired resilience. We didn't admire people who whined and mewled. In fact, those are the people you avoided.
Yeah.
At all costs. Gosh, she's a whiner. God, he's a whiner. I mean, and people said things like, mustn't grumble. It's one of my favorites. How are you? Mustn't grumble. Now he'd say, well, actually, I've got stage 4 cancer.
Not sure that's grumbling.
I know, but we talked about it like that.
Right, okay.
People from that generation still say things. I have a friend of that generation who's got cancer at the moment, and she's like, oh, it's so boring. Oh, it's so boring. Everyone I grew up with was like that. Now, you might say there's something unhealthy about that, but there's actually something healthy about it too. And there's something healthy about assuming that everyone has their troubles, and so they don't need you to add yours to their list of things to worry about that day. And, cheer people up and encourage them where you can and so on. And certainly don't bring them down.
Well, it's the weird sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of pedestalizing victimhood that there is a limitless sky on how much victimhood you can claim.
Yes.
Whereas if your status and your prestige is downstream from your accomplishments, there is a limit on how much you can accomplish because you need to go out and fucking do it.
Yes.
Right? Reality is going to constrain how much impressive stuff you can go and do. But there is a ineffable universe of athlete's foot and my gluten intolerance and my chronic flatulence and my, whatever else.
Yes.
Those are things that you can just continue to accumulate like trinkets.
Yes. I just find those people boring. I just don't care for victimhood. I think it's an undesirable emotion. It's a sign of a rather undesirable person. But I don't know why we've given into this. I'm genuinely, particularly in Britain, I'm just baffled by it because it wasn't the country we had.
Well, maybe it's, how you said your solution for courage was to surround yourself with courageous people. If you kind of get this mimetic wave,
yes,
almost moving through where fewer courageous people are around, which creates fewer courageous role models, which means to,
Yeah. And you have the thing of men being persuaded to become cringing eunuchs. It's not a good thing.
Well, that's another reason why, this conversation around the guy in the subway is so interesting because is he really supposed to stand up for the women, or is that Is he mansplaining? What if he mansplains while he stops a woman
Well,
from being dragged around by her hair?
Well, of course, the answer to that is that the era has to say, you know what, there's no such thing as mansplaining, or at least it's not very important. Get on to something more important, like women not being assaulted on the subway. You know, choose your priorities.
But the denial of sex differences would lead to the conclusion that woman can. Like, why shouldn't the women stand up?
Why shouldn't they use their upper body weight?
Yes, yeah, to push this fentanyl-fueled maniac off this lady.
Well, as I say, it's a luxury belief, that one, and it doesn't meet reality very well. I'm not sure anyone would be very happy if the men in the carriage said to the women in the carriage, go on.
Your turn.
Yeah. We've had our centuries of patriarchal hierarchy and warfare. Yeah. What is it? There's one that got my goat recently with somebody. Was it in the US or UK? It always happens now whenever anything comes up about conflict. Hillary Clinton was one of the worst culprits at doing this, but they always say this thing of, you know, one of the reasons you've got to stop any war once it starts is they say, you know, the first victims of war are women. No, they're fucking not. They're men who do most of the fighting and the dying. Hillary Clinton's point is, well, then they're widows, and then
the poor widows of the men that are dead.
Yeah, actually the British MOD has a special section now dedicated, I think thanks to the impressive insight of that military expert Angelina Jolie. They have a special bit of the MOD dedicated to women in conflict, the suffering of women in conflict. Why not have the suffering of men in conflict as well? Such weird priorities, our age. It's totally unserious. This age is so unserious. It's why you can't help thinking that at some point the maniacs, the barbarians will just break in because we've made ourselves so weak.
But it's so captivating, right? This is what I meant when I said, you know, have we progressed beyond peak woke? Because it seems to me like both the hyper woke and hyper anti-woke thing is capturing so much of the attention.
Oh, I'm so bored of these people. They're so ridiculous. Can't spend any more of my life listening to them. I don't want to listen to the slowest kid in the class. I don't want to go at his or her speed. I don't want to talk to somebody so mentally impaired that they think that we are a weirdly hermaphroditic species, or that the clownfish is a useful species to interpret behavior of human beings. Like, we can't go at this speed. No. 20 years ago, at the dawn of the internet age, we had hoped that we would get so much farther in the 21st century. And here we are with this stupid society slowed down by maniacs debating the first thing we knew, boy or girl. Like, no, not going at that speed.
Emma Raducanu did an advert for HSBC recently, which you may have missed. HSBC rewrote 3 classic fairy tales. Their book's called Fairer Tales, and it shows that women don't need men at all. With financial attitudes shaped as early as 5 years old, the new book challenges traditional gender stereotypes. The new book, called Fairer Tales, Princesses Doing It for Themselves, reimagines Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and Rapunzel as successful businesswomen. Prince Charming...
Successful businesswomen,
Prince Charming is erased as the main character. Emma Raducanu read to them, so in the end, the princesses didn't need a prince to save them. They set up their own businesses, saved their money, and then spent it very wisely. Maybe one day you'll buy a tower or set up your own shoe business.
That's a quote.
Said the tennis player.
That's the worst. I mean, I read Meghan Markle's book, The Bench, and that's worse. That's worse. Wow.
Yeah.
What an inspiring tale.
Fairer Tales.
It's so
princesses doing it for themselves.
Have you seen the South Park episode of where Cartman wakes up? He has a nightmare.
You told me about this over lunch yesterday. For the people that haven't seen it, what is it?
Cartman has a nightmare. It turns out he is a diverse black woman. His character is recast, and all of his friends, Kenny and everyone else, are diverse female or transracial characters. And then Cartman wakes up from the nightmare. No, And his mother comes in. What is it? What is it? Are you having another dream where once again all my favorite characters in the cartoons have been replaced by ethnically diverse women? And she goes, "It's okay, Cartman. It's okay. The CEO of Disney isn't hiding under your bed. Hey, would you check? Would you check, Mum? Okay, I checked. She's not there. I'm worried that she's going to come out again, replace all my favorite characters with ethnically diverse women." I love those guys. God, they keep doing it. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with there was that rather unappealing young woman who was meant to be is playing Snow White in the new Disney Snow White.
Rachel Ziegler.
No, somebody else. And she...
It is.
Is it?
Yeah, and Rachel Ziegler. Well, she said Prince Charming wasn't a prince, he was a stalker.
Yeah, and she didn't need Prince Charming to discover that she could be the woman she could be. I mean, this is like sub-Barack Obama circa 2007. Like, the princess is the person she's been waiting for or something. You think...
Your sister's keeper.
Why don't they invent new tales? That's what I can never understand with that. Why don't they just invent new tales instead of screwing up every existing tale that's loved?
Well,
make your boring movie about an inspirational tale of a woman who wants to start a business and then does and has some success. I mean, okay, make that into a film. Why do you have to go and ransack and pillage all of the storehouse of stories that people liked?
Brett Cooper's playing Snow White for Daily Wire. Did you see that announcement?
What?
You haven't seen this?
Oh, no.
Let me tell you. Jeremy Boring and Ben Shapiro are doing their own live-action remake of Snow White with Brett Cooper as Snow White. Because she's like West End trained, right? So she's very well trained, supposedly a very well trained actor who can sing, apparently. It's like the triple threat, podcast, act, sing.
Right.
And they announced it the other week. It's going to be coming out next year.
God, I hope they'd slay Disney.
There's a rumor that Disney has had to reshoot a ton of scenes, including all of the dwarf scenes, because originally the dwarves weren't dwarves.
That's right.
They were like a multiracial just group of different people.
They were diverse ethnic women.
It was the South thing again. But apparently, this is just a rumor, but apparently they've reshot it, all of the scenes with the dwarfs, to CGI actual dwarfs in.
Oh,
so they've gone full.
Yeah, because I know that there was a revolt of the dwarves, which is something you don't hear every day.
No,
there was a revolt of the dwarves because, of course, dwarf actors who have their equity cards are annoyed because there's not many dead cert jobs.
Yeah, you'd have presumed that there should have at least been 7.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus a stunt actor. Stunt dwarf.
Stunt one to do all 7 stunts.
Well, you could have 14, I guess. It depends how demanding the acting.
How much largesse you want to spread around the dwarf actor community. But yeah, the point is there actually was apparently a rebellion about this because these are some of the few dead cert roles we've got.
Well, is this not the same, the people who didn't cast that, is that not the same group of people that would say we can only have a gay actor playing a gay man and we can only have a black actor playing a black man and we can only have
those people as such, I won't use the word. Yeah, I mean, that, again, we haven't got time to go at the pace of these people. Acting is pretending to be other people. People will be shocked that most people who play Hamlet are not themselves members of the Danish royal family. Welcome to the world of make-believe.
A charity shop in Swansea asked people not to donate sex toys. Barnardo's customers have been asked to refrain from donating used and unused marital aids as they aren't quite the sort of toys we're looking for.
When they say we want your old books, your old toys, they didn't mean sex toys. Right. I think that's a perfectly good policy for a second-hand shop.
Customers were reminded,
caught rifling through the second-hand dildo bin. You don't. What have they got in here? No.
Is there a dressing room?
Yeah.
Customers were also reminded that the branch had CCTV so that these items can be traced back to the original owners.
Oh.
According to
that means that there's like a what's it called, that thing in Australia? The boomerang. That's a boomerang
You
effect.
try
with
and
your
give your dildo
Yeah,
away and it
you give
keeps
it away,
coming
and
back
then
to
it's
you.
back on your doorstep the next morning.
God damn it.
I mean, why can't I go and get rid of this thing?
Take
Throw it
it.
over the hedge.
But it keeps landing in Bernardo's.
And then they bring it back. It's a dildo that will never die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thinking
Well,
about.
thank you for that story. That was beautiful.
Well, I've got another one.
Is there a lesson we can take from this?
Oh, I think just be careful where you put your dildos, really, is the meta.
There's the moral of the story.
Yeah. Never leave your dildo in Bernardo's. Yeah, definitely not in the bargain bin. School in Lafayette has refused to celebrate Halloween because it isn't inclusive while going all out for LGBT plus History Month. Is there much history with LGBT
No,
plus?
there's gay history. I mean, there are lots of gay people in history, and there is that, but it's also what we used to call history. There isn't much T history. There's
B history?
I mean, there are sort of. I'm a bit skeptical about bisexuality, but there's a bit of bisexuality in history, of course. But I mean, again, these people are such ignoramuses. They never know anything. I can't tell you, Chris. I mean, I have to deal with some of this shit, and they just don't know anything. And they keep It's like the Orwell thing. They keep reporting their so-called discoveries as if people didn't know them before. And everybody knew most of the stuff that they are trying to bring out, and it's just very tedious. And again, what's happened to the mainstream thing of it? Why aren't we concentrating on big subjects, big authors, big historical issues, instead of this boring, slow pace?
We're here at ARC, and we're going to be attending at some point this week. I can't remember what the tagline is. Something about a better vision for the future, a more positive vision for the future. I think.
Better story.
Better story for the future. Sorry, Jordan. And what is your, or how do you think that we can begin to tell a more positive story for the future? Because it seems to me that much of the proposals are quite easily criticized, and often rightly so. But there's this sort of zero-sum view of happiness and growth, that somebody else's happiness somehow detracts from mine.
Well, that's a particularly British view, of course.
Very much. Yeah.
If that guy's got something, it's because I've not got it.
He's taken it from me.
Taken it from me.
Yeah, but what's a more positive vision of the future? How can we
Well,
develop
one
that?
would be that we're not facing imminent apocalypse and catastrophe all the time from every possible direction, and particularly not ones that people have whipped up a new generation into a fervor over. I mean, I think that the green apocalyptic thing is particularly damaging to young people. I think it's very, very bad for their mental health, very, very detrimental to their sense of how they build a future. And I think a lot of young people have been lied to about the proximity of global climate catastrophe. I mean, every time there isn't an actual catastrophe going on in the world, our leaders go straight back to the climate catastrophe, or the climate crisis, they now call it. What is happening is not a crisis. It may be a problem to be managed, but there's a luxury in calling such things a crisis. A crisis is like, my shoes are on fire. That's a crisis. Not like it's possible that in 40 years we'll need more AC. I don't see that as a crisis. But so yes, I think that in general there are several things that are big stories, big narratives. People are being spun, which are incredibly enervating. That is, they sap energy out of the society. You can feel it. The hopelessness, if you tell young people they're not going to live into adulthood because they're all going to burn to death. The hopelessness of saying, you can't change anything, or that this is the trajectory we're on. I think that one of the other ones in the green stuff is the hopelessness of saying to people effectively, you shouldn't leave any footprint on the planet.
Including children.
And just to put one thing out there about the hopelessness of that, I mean, there's this new thing that many cities have signed up to, including London, which is a future in which, among other things, we will not be allowed to move around very much, and we will be allowed a flight perhaps every 6 years, I think it is.
What's this?
It's this cities, what's it called? I'm blanking on the name. It's this new proposal for cities in 2030 or something. Sadiq Khan has signed up London to it. It's one of these carbon neutral fantasies.
No fun 2030.
Yeah, and one of them is that you won't be allowed to fly more than once every X number of years. And of course, none of it makes any sense because, among other things, all that means is, apart from the fact that the airline industry is destroyed, is that what it means is the cost of an airline ticket will be like 40 times higher. But so they always assume you can do all of these things and nothing will change. Like, amazingly, you'll be able to put a rule like that in and you won't destroy the airline industry or whatever. But all of it is just so anti-human. I mean, it is so anti-human. Like the aspiration of human beings should not be to be born, fight against the patriarchy, leave no carbon footprint, and die in the most ethically fine manner. Preferably taken out at a Swiss clinic, and then like burnt in a cardboard box. It's not a very heroic narrative, And I think that actually we do orient our lives around stories and around narratives, and we should not have the eunuch narrative that I've just laid out. We should have heroic narratives. I mean, for instance, the narrative of the of adventure, of life being an adventure. That you set out on a path and hopefully you set yourself out on a heroic path, or at least an exciting path. I mean, the counterpoint of the one I laid out earlier, of the one, you don't know, the counterpart of the one I laid out earlier, which is everything that's going to happen if you go along this path of things other people have persuaded you to say, is, well, where you're going. You know everything to say, and you know kind of what trajectory your life will be on. Well, I say, well, yeah, and there's another trajectory as well. And it's the one that I suspect you orient ourselves in our life, which is, I don't know exactly. I don't know with that certainty. I don't know what will happen. But if I put one foot fairly sure-footedly in front of the next, and tread well, and orient myself by things like truth. Sure, I don't have the certainty, but it's an adventure. And it's my adventure, your adventure. You actually own it. And then, fancy that, you'll actually have your life.
You can feel proud of what you got to, right? Because you weren't being ventriloquized by somebody else's...
You didn't spend your life saying things you don't know or mean or believe, or just repeating like a parrot in order to keep in with a group of people you shouldn't seek the affirmation from. You will live your life.
Remember that the outcomes that most people get are ones that you don't want in any case. The average American is obese, divorced, and with less than 1K in the bank. So
sobering, isn't it?
Doing what everybody else does sounds like a very surefire strategy, but the outcomes are ones that you don't want.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, and that can be the case with financially successful people. I mean, it can be the case with people. I mean, I often say that people who go into professions which they don't like, and again, it's interesting. I mean, some of them there are ones that people apologize for as you talk to them. You notice that? There's certain, normally these days, one of the biggest self-deprecating professions is lawyers. You say to somebody, what are you doing? I'm a lawyer. I think, why that?
Yeah. You spent 5 years in full-time education, 3 years in developing to...
And normally it's like they think, oh, well, it's not very interesting or something. But I think, why wouldn't you do something where you went, I am a lawyer. It's fantastic. I love doing this.
That's British lawyers again for you, I bet.
Well, no, I've seen Americans do that as well. My point is and they're financially well rewarded.
Yeah.
And there's rules you can follow on that. Like there are ones I don't understand. If you are doing a job that pays you well and allows you to provide for your loved ones, that's worth doing. Even if it's not your optimal role. Doing a role that you don't much care for, and you're not providing for other people, and you don't see any particular purposes, that's probably not a good idea.
Well, or you could go, you know that there are other options and other routes open to you that would allow you to also provide for the family you're providing for.
Yeah.
The bravery narrative is definitely one that I think is lacking. And this risk aversion that we have, this young people getting their driver's licenses later than ever. Most commonly living arrangement for men under the age of 35 is still living at home with their parents.
Yeah, it's just such an awful stat.
People going into full-time employment later than ever. Like, think about, when we were... Actually, no, you are the worst person to talk about this. You told me you didn't get your driver's license until some ungodly age.
Late.
But
yeah.
Most people...
But I'm not risk averse.
Couldn't
I was just
wait.
lazy on that.
They manifest similarly. Most people, 17 years old in the UK, driver's license. I want to be free. I want to be liberated. I don't want to have to be asking mum and dad for lifts, et cetera, et cetera. And there's not a narrative of adventure.
No. And I think that is important, because I think that if you don't have a narrative of adventure and success and an idea of what that looks like, you are disproportionately likely to live a more miserable life. And I think probably both of us, to some extent, have worked our way out as we've done it and, trodden a path that's not completely clear. And if you said to me, what are you going to do in 10 years' time, Douglas? I couldn't particularly tell you. I'd tell you roughly what I'd like to do, but it's not entirely clear.
Yeah.
It might be if I was in a corporate law firm and hoping to make partner or something like that. But yeah, I mean, the lack of clarity on it should be energizing, I'd have thought.
Well, that's what's exciting about it. But also for the desire for certainty, which is also exactly where the conspiracism comes from, right? Because it removes random chance from the world and makes everything coordinated rather than coincidental. That desire for certainty really dissuades people from going and doing something which has potentially outsized outcomes.
Well, look at what happens, the narrative of leaving home or leaving the village or leaving the town. There's every reason not to go, because if you go, you risk a lot of things. One of them is failing. And if you go and you fail, then you have to go back to where you were from, a failure.
With your tail between your legs.
And then you can console yourself that you tried it, but it didn't work. A lot of people will not even make the try, because they think it won't work. So they never leave. And other people go and they finally make it to the city. And I mean, this is a story as old as our species. They finally make it to the city or the large gathering place, and they make it there. And one of the reasons why New York is a thrilling city is it's filled with people making it. I mean, plenty of people who will fail. And it's very harsh in a way, because the two are so close together. The millionaires blocks will have a veteran with a sign lying on the street outside. So you always and then you get that simultaneous thing of success and the mirror of it of desperate failure. Or I mean, I don't mean that in a judgmental way in the case of the veteran, but desperate life.
Yep.
Very close to each other. And I suspect that both of these things fire up New Yorkers all the time.
Yeah, well, you're getting to see how far you could go and how far you could fall shown in front of you all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, there's an interesting study by Candice Blake in Australia that looked at wealth inequality in local ecologies positively predicting sexualization of women in online dating profiles. So
okay, I think I followed that. Yeah.
If there is high wealth inequality, women both see the sort of partner they could get in their wildest dreams and in their worst nightmares. And it positively predicts more sexualized images in online dating profiles and social media. And her argument was that it amps up a woman's competitive edge in terms of finding a partner that they think would be able to ensure they don't end up down at the bottom end of the inequality distribution, and instead they end up in the clouds where they've seen people's outcomes occurring.
Well, of course, there are also people who fake it. So, I mean...
well, that's the effective way to play the game.
I was once in India and had a guide who I got talking to, and I said, we were talking about how easy or otherwise dating was in the outskirts of Delhi, which means the slums. And he said, the trick is, and he did describe it as a trick, is that if you meet a girl you like, you go for a date with her, but you borrow your friend's shoes, for instance. Like there'll be a friend who has a pair of trainers sneakers that are nice, good, and you borrow his shoes for the date. And then like another time you might borrow a friend's motorbike. So like the pool of men helps like swap around things.
Right, okay.
And the idea
They
is
have one good dating outfit and vehicle between 10 people.
Yes, and he said the idea was that you get the woman to say she loves you and she'll marry you, and then you do the reveal it was somebody else's shoes.
Your shit shoes.
Yeah. Which I thought was both horrific, admirable, he told it to me like that, and horribly recognizable. Think of all the people who splash around money in restaurants and things who don't really have it, or pretend to live above their means, or do live above their means. It's all to try to entrap a mate, I think.
People do a lot for sex.
Yeah, I know. I've seen.
Douglas Murray, ladies and gentlemen. Douglas, I really appreciate you. What's coming up next? What can people expect over the next few months?
I don't know. I don't know what I expect over the next few months. I'm going to a couple of war zones and we'll report back.
I appreciate you. Thank you, mate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode with Douglas, you will love my full-length, over 2-hour-long podcast with Jordan Peterson. Go on. Give it a tap.